President Trump says it's time for the US to end the filibuster after nearly 3 weeks of a government shutdown. Now, the latest move in the ongoing Congress dispute is the nuclear option debate. Doug Luzada has details from Washington, D.C.
This isn't the first call to end the filibuster, but it does up the ante here on Capitol Hill as lawmakers have already begun leaving town for the weekend. Complete with a Halloween soundtrack, President Trump and the First Lady handed out candy to White House trick-or-treaters yesterday. Just hours before President Trump offered up a message on Truth Social that could frighten institutionalists on Capitol Hill. It is now time for the Republicans to play their Trump card, he wrote, and go for what is called the nuclear option. Get rid of the filibuster and get rid of it now.
On this vote, the yeas are 49, the nays are 45.
All of those Senate shutdown votes that have failed so far have fallen short of the 60-vote threshold needed to overcome a filibuster. Nuke the filibuster, and Republicans can do this all on their own.
Trump is a vindictive politician and a heartless man.
All right, people, welcome back to Jack Mockler. After months of testing and pushing past limits, the music stops on a random Tuesday. The moment when unchecked power meets its first real check has arrived. Congress doesn't just grumble this time. They don't hold a few hearings, issue some strongly worded letters, and then go back to fundraising. No, they stand up, they vote, they veto your orders. Federal courts don't just issue warnings or slap your wrist. They drop permanent blocks. They tell you, in language so clear a child could understand it, that you've crossed the line. That what you're trying to do isn't bold or visionary. It's unconstitutional. It's unlawful. And it's not happening. Not on their watch. Not today. Not ever.
That could end the sniping on Capitol Hill over the shutdown, but Republican leaders have already rejected ending the filibuster, knowing they could regret it one day when Democrats are in charge. And regardless, some think Democrats are about to cave despite their calls for more health care subsidies.
I think it's going to happen next week.
Why?
Just because the carnage is piling up and Democrats are getting hurt more than they're being helped.
And while troops will be paid today after the Pentagon moved money around, federal SNAP benefits are set to run out this weekend, and there are more flight delays, with Delta Airlines now joining calls for Congress to pass the Republican bill. Democrats are holding firm, though, with this shutdown about to become the longest on record.
And just like that, all that power you thought you had, the power to bend reality with a signature, it starts crumbling between your fingers like dry sand. Because here's the truth they don't teach you in political science classes. Presidential authority isn't infinite. It's not a blank check. It's not a monarchy with better lighting. There are walls. There are fences. There are consequences. And right now, in real time, Donald Trump is slamming into those walls at full speed. The system isn't just pushing back anymore. It's shoving. Hard. Now, before we go any deeper, let me level with you.
This morning, President Trump is calling on Republicans to change the rules in the Senate to reopen the government. Trump posting overnight, it is now time for the Republicans to play their Trump card and go for what is called the nuclear option. Get rid of the filibuster and get rid of it now. The move would allow Republicans to pass a bill to fund the government with a simple majority instead of the 60 votes currently needed. But Senate Majority Leader John Thune has warned against this move, saying it could come back to bite Republicans whenever Democrats take power back. Meanwhile, millions of Americans fear their food assistance or SNAP benefits will run out tomorrow as the government shutdown drags on.
I've gone to social media to ask for help, everyone that I could possibly think of.
It now appears a federal judge hearing a lawsuit over emergency funding may step in. Judge Indira Talwani saying right now Congress has put money in an emergency fund for an emergency, and it's hard for me to understand how this isn't an emergency. Republicans argue it's not that easy.
If they transfer funds from these other sources, it pulls it away immediately from school meals and infant formula.
The judge dismissing the administration's explanation, saying, I want agency action, not lawyering. We're not going to make everyone drop dead.
You already know you can't trust the headlines. Half of them are screaming outrage. The other half are spinning damage control. That's exactly why we built Pump Politics. To cut through the noise. To hand you the real story, the real context, and zero corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, if you want to wake up every morning with the truth already in your inbox, click the link in the description and join our free newsletter. And if you believe in what we're doing, Come be part of a community that actually gives a damn about facts. All right, let's get back to the fire. Here's what's actually happening right now. The judge in this latest case didn't just shake his head and sigh. He looked the administration's lawyers dead in the eye and said, "I want agency action, not lawyering. We're not going to make everyone drop dead."
The judge could compel the administration to release the funds, but whether the Trump administration will comply remains to be seen. And even if it does, the emergency funding available would still fall short of the monthly SNAP payouts. Back on Capitol Hill, Democrats digging in, refusing to open the government until Republicans agreed to extend Obamacare subsidies to prevent healthcare insurance premiums from skyrocketing next year. A Utah woman we spoke to says even with the subsidies, her premium next year will rise from $495 to $753. And without the subsidies, it will more than quadruple to more than $2,100.
We can't afford to double what it costs for us to live just to have health insurance.
Republicans argued the Affordable Care Act, which set up Obamacare, was a bad law that drives up premiums and strains doctors. President Trump last night posting, quote, "Obamacare is a disaster. Rates are going through the roof for really bad health care. Do something, Democrats." Stacey Cox says right now a flawed plan is better than no plan. Meanwhile, as more government workers go without paychecks, more of them are turning to food banks.
That's not courtroom theater. That's a federal judge telling the most powerful man in the country that his legal gymnastics aren't fooling anyone. The judge has the authority to compel the administration to release frozen funds. But the real question isn't whether he can. It's whether Trump will comply. And that answer is still hanging in the air like smoke. Meanwhile, Republicans are on Capitol Hill arguing that the Affordable Care Act is a disaster, that it drives up premiums, that it strangles doctors. And President Trump is on social media posting the exact same thing. Obamacare is a disaster, he says. But here's what makes this moment genuinely wild. This isn't business as usual. This is unprecedented in the modern era. We're watching Republicans and Democrats, people who normally can't agree on the color of the sky, join forces to override Trump's executive orders. We're watching federal judges issue permanent blocks on his most aggressive power grabs. Not temporary holds, not requests for more briefings. Permanent, dead, done. This is a full-scale institutional takedown of a president who genuinely believed he could govern by decree. And the message being sent from every corner of Washington couldn't be clearer. Presidents are not kings. They are not dictators. They cannot simply wake up and decide that the Constitution is a suggestion box. There are checks and balances. There are limits. And Trump just found out, the hard way, that those limits still apply to him. Even after everything he's gotten away with before. Even after all the close calls. Even after years of testing just how far he could lean before the system broke. This time, the system isn't breaking. It's fighting back. And right now, it's winning. So let's talk about what's really going on. Let's walk through which executive orders are being torched, why Congress and the courts have suddenly found their spines, and what this means for the rest of Trump's presidency. Because this isn't a minor setback. This isn't a temporary roadblock. This is a turning point. This is the moment when Trump's long power grab finally hit a wall that refuses to move. Over the past several months, Trump has been signing executive orders like confetti. Tariffs here, regulation rollbacks there, voter registration requirements, federal funding freezes, government shutdown brinkmanship. You name it, he tried to do it through executive action. And for a while, it looked like he might actually get away with it. Like he always has. Like he always does. But not this time. A federal judge stepped in and issued a permanent block on key parts of Trump's voter registration executive order. Not a delay. Not a revision request. A permanent block. The judge's ruling was brutal in its clarity. Trump's order was illegal executive overreach. The president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally rewrite voting laws. What Trump was trying to do violated federal law and the Constitution. And so the order is dead. Trump can't enforce it. He can't revive it. It's over. Buried. And that was just the opening salvo. because Congress decided to get in on the action too. Lawmakers stepped in and overrode Trump's regulation repeal plans. They invoked their constitutional authority and forced Trump's own cabinet to halt actions that had been deemed unlawful under his executive orders. Let that sink in for a second. Congress didn't just hold a press conference. They didn't just tweet their disapproval. They actually used their power to stop the president, to veto his orders, to look him in the face and say, "No, Mr. President, you don't have the authority to do this, and we're not going to let you." And here's what makes this truly historic. It wasn't just Democrats doing this. Republicans joined in too. Republicans who normally march in lockstep with Trump. Republicans who usually give him whatever he wants. They looked at these executive orders and said, "Yeah, this is too far. This crosses a line we can't defend." That's not just a crack in Republican unity, that's a fracture. That's a sign that even Trump's own party has limits. Even they have a breaking point. Now, how is Trump handling all of this? Exactly how you'd expect. Reports leaking out of the White House describe him as absolutely furious, raging at his advisors, demanding to know how this could happen. How dare Congress and the courts defy him? But here's the thing, they're not defying him. They're doing their jobs. They're enforcing the Constitution. They're upholding the rule of law. They're making sure that no president, not even Donald Trump, gets to operate like a monarch who governs by royal decree. The numbers tell the real story here. Legal experts and government watchdog groups have been tracking every challenge to Trump's executive orders, and the count is staggering. More than 38 times in recent months. 38 separate legal challenges. That's not normal. That's not business as usual. That's a president who keeps trying to do things he has no legal authority to do, and the courts keep telling him no. Multiple actions have been stopped by injunctions. Multiple orders have been struck down as unconstitutional. The pattern is undeniable. Trump thinks he can do whatever he wants, and the judicial system keeps reminding him that he can't. Congressional leaders haven't been shy about it either. After vetoing Trump's latest attempt at unilateral rule, they issued a statement that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Presidents are not monarchs, they said. They do not operate by decree. Legally, they can only act in accordance with constitutional and statutory law. That's not a partisan attack. That's a civics lesson. That's a reminder of how American government is actually supposed to work. And it's a direct slap at Trump's entire approach to the presidency. So let's dig deeper into what's actually happening here. Because this isn't just one executive order getting blocked in isolation. This isn't just one court case or one congressional action. This is a systematic, coordinated, multi-front pushback against Trump's entire philosophy of executive power. Start with the courts. The voter registration ruling is a perfect case study. Trump signed an executive order requiring new documentation for voter registration. The stated goal was to prevent voter fraud, to make sure only eligible citizens vote. Sounds reasonable on the surface, right? Except there's a massive problem. The president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally change voting laws. That's not how any of this works. Voting regulations are set by Congress and by state legislatures. The president can't just wake up one morning and decide to add new requirements. That power isn't in his constitutional toolbox. But Trump tried anyway. He signed the order. He directed federal agencies to implement it, and voting rights groups immediately sued. And when the ruling came down, it wasn't a temporary injunction. Those happen all the time. Courts put temporary holds on executive actions while they review the legal arguments. But this was different. This was permanent. The judge looked at Trump's order, looked at the law, and said absolutely not. This is illegal. The president doesn't have this authority. The order violates federal law. It's unconstitutional. It's permanently blocked. Trump can't enforce it now. He can't enforce it later. It's done. And that's significant. Not just because of voter registration, but because of the principle. It establishes that there are real, enforceable limits on what any president can do through executive action. And those limits apply to Trump just like they'd apply to any other president. He is not special. He is not above the law, no matter how many times he says otherwise. Now let's talk about Congress. What happened there is almost even more remarkable. Trump had been using executive orders to repeal regulations he didn't like. Environmental regulations, financial regulations, consumer protection rules. He was just erasing them with a signature. And for a while, it seemed like he could get away with it. But then Congress stepped in. They invoked the Congressional Review Act and other constitutional authorities to override Trump's actions. They forced his cabinet to halt implementation of orders deemed unlawful. And here's the key detail that everyone needs to understand. This wasn't just Democrats. Republicans joined in too. Why? Because even Republicans who generally support deregulation, even Republicans who want to roll back Obama-era rules, they recognize that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. You can't just have the president unilaterally decide which laws apply and which don't. That's not how separation of powers works. If you want to repeal a regulation, you need to follow the proper legal process. You need to follow the Administrative Procedure Act. You need to provide justification. You need to allow for public comment. You can't just ignore all of that because it's inconvenient. But that's exactly what Trump was trying to do. He was trying to bypass the entire regulatory process and just govern by fiat. And Congress said, no, we're not allowing that. We're using our constitutional authority to stop you. And they actually did it. That's huge. That's Congress reasserting itself as a co-equal branch of government. That's lawmakers saying we're not just rubber stamps. We have a duty to uphold the Constitution, and we're going to do it. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Legal tracking organizations have documented that Trump's executive orders have been challenged in court more than 38 times in recent months. 38 separate legal challenges. And many of those challenges have succeeded. Courts have issued injunctions. They've struck down orders. They've sent them back to agencies for reconsideration. They've imposed permanent blocks. That's an extraordinary level of judicial pushback. And it tells you something crucial about what's really happening here. Trump isn't just pushing the boundaries of executive power. He's repeatedly, systematically violating the law. He's signing orders that he knows or should know exceed his constitutional authority. And he's betting that he can get away with it, that the courts will move slowly, that Congress won't have the votes to stop him, that by the time anyone figures out how to push back, the damage will already be done. And for a while, that strategy kind of worked. But not anymore, because now the courts are moving faster. They're issuing permanent blocks instead of just temporary holds. And Congress is using every tool at its disposal to rein Trump in. The Supreme Court is getting involved too. There are currently cases pending before the court on Trump's tariff authority, on his shutdown maneuvers, on his regulatory actions. And the fact that the Supreme Court is willing to take these cases, willing to review Trump's actions, that's significant. Because it means even the highest court in the land thinks there are serious questions about whether Trump is operating within the bounds of his constitutional authority. Let's also talk about what Trump has actually been trying to do with all this power. Because it's not just about him exceeding his authority. It's about what he's using that authority for. Take the tariffs, for example. Trump has imposed tariffs on countries around the world, claiming he's protecting American industry and national security. But economists across the political spectrum say these tariffs are damaging the economy. They're raising prices for consumers. They're hurting American businesses that rely on imported materials. They're triggering retaliatory tariffs that are devastating American farmers and manufacturers. And the legal question at the heart of all this is enormous. Does the president actually have the unilateral authority to impose these tariffs? Or does that power belong to Congress? Because the Constitution says Congress has the power to regulate international commerce. The president has some delegated authority in this area, sure, but can he just impose tariffs whenever he wants, for whatever reason he wants, without congressional approval? That's what the Supreme Court is going to have to decide. And if they rule against Trump, if they say he's exceeded his authority, That's going to be a massive blow to his entire economic agenda. Or look at the government shutdown tactics. Trump has been using the threat of shutdowns and actual shutdowns to try to force Congress to give him what he wants. But is that constitutional? Can the president deliberately refuse to sign funding bills? Can he deliberately shut down the government as a negotiating tactic? Or is that a violation of his duty to faithfully execute the laws? Because when the government shuts down, laws don't get enforced, services don't get provided, the government stops functioning. And arguably, that's a violation of the president's constitutional obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Courts are starting to look at that question. Congress is pushing back against it. And Trump is finding that maybe, just maybe, he doesn't have as much leverage as he thought he did. Then there are the regulation rollbacks. Trump has been trying to undo environmental protections, financial regulations, consumer safety rules, all through executive action. But many of those regulations were put in place through a formal legal process. Agencies studied the issues. They gathered public comments. They wrote detailed justifications. And under the law, you can't just undo all of that with a wave of the presidential hand. You have to go through the same process to repeal a regulation as you did to create it. You have to provide evidence and reasoning. You have to explain why the change is warranted. And Trump hasn't been doing that. He's just been signing orders saying, repeal this, roll back that, without following the proper procedures. And courts are saying, nope, that's not legal. You have to follow the law, even if you're the president. So what we're seeing right now is a comprehensive rejection of Trump's approach to executive power. Courts are blocking his orders. Congress is overriding his actions. The Supreme Court is reviewing his most controversial moves. And even some Republicans are joining the pushback. This is a constitutional crisis in the sense that we're having a fundamental debate about the limits of presidential authority. But it's also the Constitution working exactly as it's supposed to. The system of checks and balances is actually checking and balancing. The other branches of government are restraining an overreaching executive. And democracy, for all its messiness and conflict, is holding, at least for now. Now let's talk about what comes next. Because Trump's power crumbling isn't a one-time event. It's the beginning of a whole new phase in his presidency. A phase where he can't just do whatever he wants. Where Congress and the courts are actively constraining him. Where the limits of executive authority are being enforced in real time. And that changes everything. First, the immediate political consequences. Trump's entire brand is built on the idea that he's strong, that he's a winner, that he gets things done. He's the guy who makes deals, who doesn't take no for an answer, who bends Washington to his will. But what happens to that brand when Congress and the courts keep telling him no? When his executive orders keep getting blocked? When his big policy initiatives keep getting struck down as illegal? It makes him look weak. It makes him look ineffective. It undermines the core narrative that has defined his political career. And that's a problem for Trump. Because if he can't deliver wins, if he can't point to major accomplishments, then what's the argument for keeping him in power? Why should voters support him if he can't actually get anything done? Democrats are already seizing on this. They're running ads highlighting all the times Trump's orders have been blocked. They're pointing out that Trump thinks he's above the law, but the courts keep proving he's not. They're arguing that Trump's approach to governance is chaotic, illegal, and ultimately ineffective. And it's a powerful message because it's not based on opinion or ideology. It's based on facts, court rulings, congressional votes, the objective reality that Trump keeps trying to do things he doesn't have the legal authority to do, and he keeps getting stopped. Trump's response to all of this has been painfully predictable. He's attacking the judges, calling them partisan hacks, claiming the courts are part of the deep state conspiracy against him. He's raging at Congress for not backing him up. He's telling his supporters that the system is rigged, that the establishment is trying to stop him from helping the American people. Standard Trump playbook: deflect blame, attack institutions, play the victim. But here's the problem with that strategy. It works better when Trump is fighting from the outside, when he's the challenger, the outsider, the guy taking on the corrupt establishment. It doesn't work as well when he's the president, when he's the one with power. Because at some point, people start asking a simple question. If you're so powerful, why can't you get anything done? If the courts keep blocking you, maybe it's not because they're corrupt. Maybe it's because what you're trying to do is actually illegal. Second, let's talk about the long-term constitutional implications. Because what's happening right now is going to shape the presidency for decades to come. The questions being decided in these court cases, the precedents being set by Congress, they're going to define the boundaries of executive power for every future president. And that matters because if Trump loses these fights, if the courts and Congress successfully restrain his overreach, then that strengthens the system of checks and balances for everyone going forward. It establishes clear limits on what presidents can and cannot do through executive action. It reaffirms that we're a nation of laws, not a nation of one man's will. But if Trump wins, if he finds ways to circumvent these restrictions, if he establishes precedents that allow presidents to govern by decree, then we're heading towards something much more dangerous. We're heading toward an imperial presidency, toward a system where the executive branch is so powerful that Congress and the courts can't effectively check it. And that would be a fundamental change in how American government works. That would be a step away from democracy and towards something more authoritarian. So the stakes here are enormous. This isn't just about Trump. It's about what kind of government we're going to have going forward. And right now, the forces of constitutional restraint seem to be winning. Courts are enforcing limits. Congress is pushing back. The system is working. But the fight is far from over. Third, what does this mean for Trump's remaining time in office? If Trump can't govern through executive orders anymore, if Congress and the courts are going to block his most aggressive actions, then how is he going to accomplish anything? The answer is, he's going to have to work with Congress. He's going to have to negotiate. He's going to have to compromise. He's going to have to go through the normal legislative process like every other president. And honestly, Trump is terrible at that. He doesn't like compromise. He doesn't like the slow, grinding work of building coalitions and finding common ground. He wants to just issue orders and have things happen. But that's not how it works. At least it's not supposed to be how it works. And now Trump is being forced to confront that reality. He's being forced to operate within the constraints of the Constitution. And he doesn't like it. He's not good at it. And it's showing. We're likely to see Trump become increasingly frustrated and erratic as this continues. As more of his orders get blocked, as more of his initiatives fail, he's going to lash out. He's going to attack institutions. He's going to test boundaries in new ways. And that's going to create more crises, more confrontations, more legal battles. The next year of Trump's presidency is going to be defined by this struggle. Trump pushing, institutions pushing back, courts issuing rulings, Congress asserting authority, and the American people watching, trying to figure out which side they're on. The future of the country depends on what happens next. Stay tuned.